Hey everyone, it's Forrest, and welcome back to another episode of 1000 Seconds. This is episode 7 of our inaugural season, and also represents the last episode that will air in calendar year 2024. So let me take just a second to extend my best wishes to you and yours for the holiday season and the new year. I hope that you're able to find some time to rest and relax and recharge, because we all know that the path ahead in 2025 will be demanding for all of us, especially those of us in the social service and nonprofit sectors. So rest up, friends, celebrate the holidays, and we'll see you in the new year with the remainder of season 1, followed by a quick break, and then jump right into an exciting season 2. But before we get to all of that, we have a very special guest today, Dr. Kevin Dean. Kevin is the CEO, in fact, the founding CEO of the Tennessee Nonprofit Network. In my conversation with Kevin, we'll learn about his career journey and also more about how the Tennessee Nonprofit Network came to be after a statewide expansion and a rebrand that all happened very recently. The Tennessee Nonprofit Network now serves as the statewide nonprofit association for the state of Tennessee. They provide training and technical assistance, connections to resources, research, and public policy support for all nonprofits across the state. I really enjoyed this discussion with Kevin, and I'm confident you will too. Kevin Dean, welcome to 1000 Seconds. We're glad to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
This is another one of these episodes we probably could or should have done in person. I'm guessing you're right down the road. Where is your office? You're here in Memphis, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we're in the Playhouse in the Square building on the 5th floor.
Nice.
I can look down and I can see the restaurants in Overton Square from my office.
Oh, perfect. I know exactly where you are. Yeah, perfect. Yep. We absolutely should have gotten together. The next time we do something like this, we will absolutely do it in person.
Yeah, come on up.
I'd love that. Thanks again for saying yes, being a guest on season 1, as we are still working out some kinks and all of the things, but have had a great guest list so far. Excited to have you with us today. It might be that there are some folks listening who are not familiar with you or familiar with the Tennessee Nonprofit Network. I'm grabbing my notes here so I can be familiar and do a little bio check here just to make sure I've got it all right. I won't go into every detail, but start with undergrad at Memphis, right? Mm-hmm. Master's in executive leadership from Christian Brothers University, and a recent doctorate in organizational leadership from Vanderbilt.
Yes.
Layer that on or combine that with an extended career in the nonprofit sector. Again, different titles at different organizations: Director of Development, Community Services Director, Executive Director at 2, or I guess technically 3 now, organizations, right? That start from the local level to the regional level to now a statewide footprint. I mean, take all that in total, the education background and the career background, that seems to be a very intentional progression of sort of life and career through the sector. Was it in fact that intentional?
Oh yeah. The day I started, I was at Volunteer Memphis when it was his own nonprofit, and I started as an AmeriCorps worker there. So I was a stipended volunteer basically. And I had been fired from a jewelry store. I had moved away from Memphis, came back, got fired from this jewelry store. It was not my passion. And it was like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And wow. I don't have a pedigree. I didn't have a family name or anything. So I had to just like work my way up. So I started out with a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan. And now here I am. I'm no fun at parties though, because all I want to do is talk about nonprofits all the time.
That's all right. We can talk about it today for sure. We'll have our own little party here on the episode. I mean, as I was, doing the background research and reading through your bio, I was like, wow, this is very sequential, exactly how you would line this up if you were being that intentional about a career in this sector. And you've done great work, continue to do great work. I could spend the rest of the episode reading through all of the awards and recognitions that you've received. Memphis Business Journal 40 under 40. Are you still in fact under 40?
No, I'm 45 now. No, I got
Ah,
that
okay.
when I got that when I had turned 30. It was my goal. Like I'm a chronic overachiever. It was my goal to get it by the time I was 30, and I was 31 when I got it. So
Yeah.
I was a year off, but yeah, I
I
got
get
it.
it. I have one of those in my bio too, a something under something that
Right.
I'm no longer under, but it's still it's an important achievement, right? So let's talk about the sort of current work just a little bit. Again, reading here to make sure I don't miss this.
Yeah.
You came to Momentum Nonprofit Partners in 2017.
Yep.
At least in your bio and some things, the LinkedIn version and whatnot, it was to revitalize and revive the organization. The plan was a 3-year turnaround. So if my math's correct, 2017 plus 3 years, we got the turnaround completed and smacked right up against a global pandemic, uh, give or take. And,
Yeah.
and then emerged though from that global pandemic, not just revitalized and revived, but rebranded and as a whole new organization that went from serving the Mid-South to the state of Tennessee, right? First, do I have that timeline and sequence correct? And second, do you remember where our paths crossed in that, 8 or 9 years here?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I did start in 2017. We've changed the name now twice under my
Oh, wow.
leadership.
Okay.
Under my
Okay.
leadership, I'm a commitment phobe. I think that's part of my being a Libra. But yeah. So we started out as Alliance for Nonprofit Excellence. It was it was an older model of just a management support organization, and
Got it.
it was time for some changes or the organization to go away. I was hired just for an 8-month interim CEO position. I honestly didn't want the job at the time. It seemed like there was a lot of work to be done, and I
Yeah.
wanted to go back to consulting. I was a consultant. I was
Not
making
seem like it. You were right. There was a lot of work to be done.
yeah, and I was making great money as a consultant. But once I got in here, I thought this is something that you have to have the right person because this is nerdy. This is not sexy work. This is nerdy strategic planning stuff. And I was like, you know what? And the board had really wanted me to stay on, and so I did. And I was gonna be here for 3 years. And then it became 5. And then, but yeah, when I met you, it was during the pandemic. We had sort of gotten around out of our turnaround situation.
Yeah.
We were doing well. I don't remember exactly when I met you. I met so many people on Zoom over those 2 or 3 years we were
Exactly.
from
Yeah. Yeah.
home. But yeah, so it was, and I was, I had started my doctorate before COVID, and so not only were we dealing with a pandemic, working through a pandemic, and in some ways supporting the state of Tennessee. I was also working on my doctorate at the time, and yeah, so I vaguely remember COVID,
Yeah.
just because.
Yeah.
Oh, and my gallbladder burst too
Oh my
during COVID.
gosh.
So I was in the hospital. Yeah, so it was a great time, great
Yeah.
time.
Right. Yeah. You were on my list of people. I say that like my wife and I relocated to Memphis in July of 2020.
Hmm.
Uh, and I
Fun
have gone on,
times. Yeah.
yeah, fun time. And I have gone on record as saying, recognizing it's a position of privilege to be able to say so. But if you ever have the choice of whether or not to move to a brand new city in the middle of a global pandemic, I would advise against it for what it's worth. But you, along with many other people in the city, were on my list of like, hey, you should meet Kevin. Hey, you should meet this person. Hey, you should. And it all turned into Zoom calls, and it was all this sort of muddy mess. And it was like, wait, did I actually meet any of these people or not? Or what happened? I actually still have that list. It sits right over on the shelf. And I've said one day I'm going to go back through it and just like completely start over. Say, hey, we were supposed to meet 4 years ago. We didn't. Maybe we should now, and just see what happens.
I want to see your list so yeah, I can tell you
Happy to cross
who to
reference.
prioritize. Yeah.
Yeah, some may not be as relevant as they were 4 or 5 years ago. Who knows, right? So tell us just a little bit then about the organization as it exists now. 2 name
Sure.
changes later, expanded footprint,
Yeah.
but it is now the Tennessee Nonprofit Network.
Yep.
Give me the sort of elevator pitch intro. Who's the organization? What do you do?
Sure. So we became Tennessee Nonprofit Network this year. We have a sort of expanded plan for who we are and who we're going to be. So the first thing we do, we're always going to do this, is the training and technical assistance for nonprofits in the state of Tennessee.
Yeah.
It's very hard to find good training. This is something this is a profession a lot of people fall into. It's not, they don't go to school for it. Even if you get your public administration, that doesn't necessarily prepare you for all the nuance of this role in the sector. So we do a lot of training and technical assistance, helping nonprofits not get started necessarily, but get on their feet, stay on their feet, be sustainable, have the right leadership in place, things like that. We also do a lot of public policy and advocacy, and that's fairly new. Public policy was not on our agenda until COVID, and then we had to fight some big battles, and we won. And that changed the course of everything, really. So public policy and advocacy. So we represent the entire nonprofit sector in Tennessee. We have 2 lobbyists and 1 full-time staff member working on advocacy.
Oh, wow. Okay. And are they in Nashville?
2 of them are in Nashville. Yeah,
okay.
We have 2 lobbyists. And then our advocacy and research director is here in Memphis. Her name is Natalie, and she's awesome. And then the third thing we do is research. So having research codified, this stuff about the state of the sector and nonprofit compensation, which is something we're working on now.
Yeah.
Having that is good for the sector to understand itself, to make those policy changes internally, but also to give to legislators, to give to foundations and say, hey, we need a sabbatical policy for nonprofits. We need to destigmatize that, things like that. And then the final thing is resource provision. So we're taking a lot of national money and figuring out ways to spend it. A lot of times they won't let us be the fiscal, they won't let us re-grant the money, but they'll give us money to do things like big long-term cohorts, learning cohorts for nonprofits across the state. Or we gave away 3.5 million masks to nonprofits during the pandemic. Our whole office was full of hand sanitizer that we were giving out in massive, quantities. So it's stuff like that we're doing. Those are sort of the 4 key points. And with that resource provision is also information dissemination. So, when hurricanes or things like big storms or tornadoes, things like that, we're getting people connected to FEMA. We're getting people connected to the Secretary of State's office if they have a problem with some legal issues. We're making sure people have the information they need. So we can be the one-stop shop for them, so they don't have to go find it on their own.
I love it. I love it. And we'll talk about this in a few minutes. We share that as part of our background. I spent a lot of time actually with Together SC when I was in South Carolina, which was the South Carolina Nonprofit Network, right, by a slightly different name. I want to jump into all of that. We've got lots to get to, but if you have been following along in the show, or even if you haven't, just a reminder that the name of our program here is 1000 Seconds. I'm getting pinged that it's time for me to start that clock, so we need to do that. We'll count all of this as part of our intro, but I'm going to go ahead and start the clock. I'll pay attention to it so you don't have to.
Welcome to 1000 Seconds, a video series presented by 1000 Feathers and hosted by the firm's co-founder and president, Forrest Alton. In this first season, Forrest sits down with changemakers, leaders, and visionaries who are doing transformative work at the local, state, and national level. This series will give you a unique view and front row seat to bold and courageous conversations with people that Forrest has learned from and worked with along the way. So set your timers, 1000 Seconds starts now.
All right, so we're on. The clock is quite literally ticking here next to me. I'll keep an eye on that, Kevin. We talked earlier about sort of your intentionality, right? And in terms of education and career trajectory and your journey. One of the things that you and I do share, you in a more intentional way than me, however, we both have an entire career journey now connected to the nonprofit sector. Right. And have literally now seen it from all different sides. And as executive director, as staff, as board members, as consultants, et cetera. I get asked this question a lot, so I'm excited to ask it of somebody else, though, right? Who also has a career in the sector.
Yeah.
You know, if you just sort of zoom out and think about the nonprofit sector holistically, why is the sector so important? Sort of, how does it fit into the rest of the ethos, as it were?
So, you know, I'll use COVID as an example. You know, um, uh, we're nah, how do I say this nicely? So nonprofits are the ones who are on the ground doing the work, you know, especially with folks who need it the most, you know, and the issues that are most plaguing our country, and not the partisan culture wars stuff. We're talking about making sure people are fed. We're talking about making sure that animals aren't abused. We're spaying and neutering those animals, you know, making sure that kids aren't abused at home, making sure that, you know, people have access to proper health care. Those are the things that nonprofits are doing. And without you take out the safety net, you take out the advocacy folks that are in the nonprofit sector, and you're left with government officials, partisan nonprofit politicians, or I'm sorry, not nonpartisan, partisan politics, and capitalism. You know, so we're the folks that are undergirding the actual communities and making sure that they are getting what they need. Whereas, you know, everybody else, like that's why we exist. Whereas for profits are there to make money, and government is there to do whatever it's supposed to do,
whatever they're supposed to do
in theory, you know. So that's, you know, and that hasn't always been the case. The government used to do a lot more, and they've backed away over the past 100 years, backed away from that, providing those safety net support systems and things like that, and really relied on nonprofits to do that. So I'm a big historian about nonprofit stuff. I love talking about nonprofit history, but yeah, so that's why we're so important, and we're often overlooked completely by for-profit and government, which is why we need to exist.
Yeah, so let me follow up on that in just a second. But something else you said, or that caught my attention as you were answering that first question, that a lot of people I think probably don't realize is the diversity of the sector, right? I mean, they might have one very specific lane or lens or a couple lanes that they donate to, or this is what I think of when I think of nonprofits, but everything from social service to healthcare to arts and culture to the environment to, right? I mean, the diversity of the sector is in fact one of its strengths, I would say.
Absolutely. So, you know, if you have been touched by a nonprofit, whether you think about it or not, everybody just thinks, well, MIFA doesn't deliver Meals on Wheels to me, so therefore I'm, you know, if you've been to the Overton Park Conservancy, if you've been through a walk, that's because of them. You know, if you've been to the Memphis Zoo, that's a nonprofit. If you've been to Methodist Healthcare, that is a nonprofit organization. You know, so. Everybody has some sort of interaction with nonprofits. It's not just, you know, feeding or making sure that the unhoused have housing. This is making sure that folks have, you know, access to voting rights. This is or access to voting locations. That you know, it's stuff like that. We have over 5,000 nonprofits just in Memphis alone. Churches. Wow. Churches also, foundations are considered 501c3s, and those are just 501c3s. So you have 501c4s that are can be a little bit more politically active than we can. You've got the 501c6s and 17s and all those too. So
it was probably on your website somewhere that I read it, but you said 5,000 in Memphis, but 40,000 or something. That number's sticking out in my mind in Tennessee. Is that right?
40,000 in Tennessee. We're a big state. And that's a lot of nonprofits. They're mostly situated in, you know, more urban areas. There are a couple of counties that we've looked at, and they have like 2 or 3 nonprofits total. They're at least registering with the state of Tennessee, like they're supposed to. But yeah, it's a big, diverse, and, you know, not always ideologically aligned either. You know,
that's fair.
We have to be nonpartisan, but some of the issues, you know, there are organizations that are on both sides of the spectrum on certain topics. They're all welcome to be members, as long as they're not hate groups for the Nonprofit Network.
Got it. You know, all of that said, I have heard you say a lot. You know, I have said a lot. Others have said a lot. It's actually part of the Tennessee Nonprofit Network's vision that, quote, nonprofits have an equal seat at the table.
Yeah.
We're talking about 40,000 organizations across the state that do this wide-ranging, diverse set of things to lift up communities and support the population, right? I mean, you don't even have to qualify it any more than that. But yet, hearing you say nonprofits deserve or should have an equal seat at the table, that sort of implies we don't, or they don't currently. What
Yeah.
is that implicate? Am I reading into that correctly? And why do you think that is?
Yeah, no, we do not have an equal seat at the table. For one thing, we've only had lobbyists, for the entire nonprofit sector through Tennessee Nonprofit Network for a year, for less than a year. When you think about like Blue Oval that's coming to the Jackson area, Blue Oval has lobbyists that are paid very well to get what they need done at the legislative. A lot of corporations just view us as charity, and they use us for their cause marketing to increase their sales. When COVID happened, Governor Lee, his administration just didn't invite nonprofits to the table. They did an economic recovery group to reopen the state, but no nonprofits were on that committee. So we raised hell, and I think that was rightfully so, because we're on the ground, putting our own employees in danger sometimes, especially like healthcare workers and folks like that.
Right.
And so,
all of a sudden, an awful lot of nonprofit employees became essential workers, right?
Right. Yeah. If we're essential workers, then we should absolutely be at the table.
Yeah.
And so, I think what often happens, and it's nobody's, well, it is everybody's fault. It's a systemic failure, I think, of just the way the world is these days. Is everybody comes together and they get really important people to come to the table and make decisions on behalf of communities that they don't represent, and on behalf of research that they don't know or understand or whatever. Nonprofits know the communities that they're serving. They know them way better than the government does. They know them way better than the for-profits do, and they actually understand what's at play on the ground. We have to be at the table, but we're having to fight our way into these, and not just with our state government, like federal government, local government.
Sure.
Here, at some point we want to be where some of these other states are, that like I know legislators call my friend Danielle Clore in Kentucky Nonprofit Network. They call her before they file a bill.
Interesting.
They know she's going to be the best friend or the worst enemy.
Right.
And that's where we want to be, where they're calling us before they, and there were a whole bunch of bills this last year that were like, hey, why isn't nobody talking to the nonprofits about this? So we have to have it, and not just around legislation, but around everything. In the world right now, we need nonprofits at the table, because we can bring a nonpartisan, honest, research-based, evidence-based, facts to the table about what's actually happening on the ground.
I like it.
Yeah,
I like it. I used to say, and this is a little bit, more of a sort of cheeky answer to what you just really outlined, that we need to make sure the sector or individual agencies within the sector. When I used to run a nonprofit, I used to say, we will know we made it when people see us as something they need to have, not just something that's nice to have.
Yeah.
I used to get really annoyed going to parties or running into people, and they'd ask, what do you do? And I'd tell them, and they'd say something like, oh, isn't that nice? Right. And it was like, come on, man. Like, what do you mean? Isn't that not,
that's so noble? It's so noble.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for your service. Right. It's like, come on, man. Like, what are we doing here? I also wonder, I mean, there's a part of this conversation that's about convincing legislators or convincing decision makers about the power of the sector. I'm going to make an assumption here, though, and it may be right or wrong, that we also have to sort of convince/remind nonprofits themselves as a sector how much power they have. Is that fair?
Yeah. I think nonprofits have been operating in a silo for so long. I think there's many reasons for that. One, there's the nonprofit Hunger Games. We're all sort of set up. We're set up to be competitors when we shouldn't be, when we should really be collaborators. And I think that's the fault of many. I think that's a board failure. I think that's a funder failure. I think that's the nonprofit executive failure. to view everything as competition.
Yeah.
But we get so deep in the work. We're passionate people. I mean, like I ran a literacy organization for 5 years. I've always been a huge education fan and
Yeah,
supporter.
we're both stacked with books behind us. This we
Right.
get
Yeah. Huge reader,
yeah.
and so we get so deep in the weeds, and we have to wear so many hats. I think we often forget that there's a bigger, wider world out there.
Yeah.
And we keep putting band-aids on things when we should be working together to actually have systemic change. And you can't, one organization is not going to change systems. Like I've tried. It doesn't work.
Yeah, right.
You have to have a coalition. And so I think this is a paradigm shift from nonprofits, especially, I'm from Memphis, but based on what I'm seeing in Nashville and Knoxville and rural areas, nonprofits aren't working together like they should, in a lot of situations. And we have a lot of power. We're the sixth largest employer in the state.
Wow.
We're 10% of the gross state product, so we have a lot of power. We just have to use it, and we have to use it for the right things that can make our state better.
Yeah.
We have a role in that. Nonprofits have a role in that.
And a lot of that role likely falls, especially in smaller nonprofits, right? I mean, you have within the network like one person shops and like many like really large organizations, right? But no matter everything you're talking about, and I'm especially thinking about this, like I'm passionate about the work. That's how I ended up here. But a handful of us that were passionate about the work over the course of our career also ended up like as executive directors or CEOs. And they were like, hey, you really like this work. You should run this organization. And it's like, wait a minute, what? And you talked about earlier, like I maybe wasn't even professionally trained to be in the organization to begin with, much less in charge of the organization. I read a blog post that you had recently. I
Yes.
can't remember exactly what it was, but what
It was very popular. The
things they don't tell you about being a nonprofit CEO. I can't leave without hearing just a few of those. We probably don't have time for all of them. I would imagine there's 300 or so. How many things did they not tell us about that? Give us a couple.
Yeah, well, it's the loneliest job you'll ever have. Heavy is the head that wears the crown, they say. But it is that was very shocking to me. And it's just very transactional too. And so that was a big wake up call for me when I had my first executive director position. Also, people come in thinking, well, I'm not going to do fundraising as a CEO. That's what my director of development's for. That's what my board is for. Spoiler alert, you are badly misled if you think that you're not going to be the primary fundraiser, even if you have fundraising staff,
Yeah.
So that was definitely one. Also, you have to forgive yourself when you make mistakes. I'm my own worst critic. I don't need anybody telling me what I've done wrong. I'm going to beat myself up for it, too. So you have to forgive yourself. But part of that is, and one of my biggest things that I talk about in that blog post is you need a CEO, or I'm sorry, any nonprofit CEO needs a mentor, a therapist, and a executive coach. The executive coach is going to hold up a mirror and say, how would you handle this in the best way possible as your authentic self in this situation? A mentor is going to tell you what crap not to step in,
right.
and because they've stepped in it already. So, and then a therapist, when you have a spotlight shined on you, weird things show up and weird trauma shows up in weird ways. And it certainly did for me. And everybody I've talked to, they like their 8-year-old inner child, they have to have conversations with their inner child about whatever trauma they had from their childhood. Because when you're spotlit, and your constant barrage of like feedback, whether it's just noise or actual legitimate feedback, that can really take a toll.
Whew. I've got to go reread the blog again. Yeah. Just hearing you rattle off 2 or 3 of those, that it's giving me a little PTSD from my time as a nonprofit leader. Listen, we could talk a lot more about a lot more things. We'll have to do a part 2 coming up. That seems to be a consistent theme. I've tried to do 1,000 seconds and I need like 5,000 seconds with every
10,000 seconds.
Yeah, something like that. But I just, as we close, we got about a minute left here, give or take. I'm confident because I know you. I know you're sort of looking out down the horizon, right? That you're not just solving all these challenges today we're talking about, you're also thinking about sort of what's the next big thing.
Yeah.
If I'm a nonprofit leader listening to this episode, and several nonprofit leaders likely are, sort of help us predict the future. What's one big thing you see out there that we've all got to be thinking about, talking about, a challenge we've got to be
Yeah.
trying to solve?
I think there's two. One is, I'll go fast because I know we're out of time.
Oh, we're good.
The first one I think is workplace culture. We're having to rethink this completely. We have a workforce shortage in the nonprofit sector right now. And we're gonna have to really rethink how we do work, and how we build culture. And that's, I think that's something that's how we professionally develop our staff to keep them there. How do we, do we have the right policies in place, family leave and things like paid family leave, things like that. And then I think the second thing is AI. It's you probably guessed I was going to say that, but we've got to figure out how to use that effectively to make us more efficient, but also not replace us. Because the human relationship element to nonprofits is one of the key,
especially in this sector, right?
Yeah. You can't replace that with all technology, all fake humans.
Yeah.
So until they become sentient and they have emotions and empathy, we can't rely on them yet. So we got to figure that out so we can best utilize it in the sector, ethically as well.
Yeah, two really good examples. Kevin, I have enjoyed getting to know you, learning more about your past, getting connected with the Tennessee Nonprofit Network. For others that want to dive in, learn more about you, more about the organization, go read the blog we just referenced or any of your blogs. Quick shout out, website, social media, where should we go? How do we follow along?
Yeah, follow us. You can go to tnnonprofits.org. Check out our website. We have you can spend hours there getting in a going down a rabbit hole with all the stuff we provide. But also you can find us on LinkedIn. We're really active on LinkedIn. Tennessee Nonprofit. I think it's Tennessee Nonprofit Network. Just Google us or put us in the search line. You
in
can
the
find
search,
us.
we'll get there.
And then we're also on Facebook. Not as active on Facebook, but LinkedIn seems to be our sweet spot. So find us on LinkedIn for sure.
I love it. Kevin, thanks again for being here. Look forward to being in touch and crossing paths in person soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.